Kneel down and apologize, Laya. Margaret Whitmore's voice echoed through the wedding hall like a blade slicing through the lavish atmosphere. White gowns, crystal chandeliers, soft jazz music, all froze in an instant. Laya stood there, still holding the fallen tablecloth, her gaze unwavering. Right, now, Charlotte added coldly from her lace-covered dressing pedestal. Everyone was looking at her. The black maid, who had worked for them for 15 years. But today, a single act of refusal would ignite a fire strong enough to consume the entire wedding, and when that fire rose, no one, not even the bride, could put it out. This is a story about dignity, about the final threshold a person can bear, and you won't believe what happened after that one refusal. Laya Johnson walked slowly along the gravel path leading into the Whitmore estate. Beneath the old oak trees, the Savannah sunlight spilled gold across her hair, but inside she felt only heaviness. Each step brought back a memory. 15 years working here. Cooking, scrubbing floors, folding napkins, serving banquets she was never invited to. Inside the spacious kitchen, the smell of cornbread baking mingled with the rich scent of coffee. Laya opened the oven gently, her hands calloused from repeating this motion thousands of times. No one in the house knew those hands had raised a younger brother who became an engineer in Atlanta. No one asked. The white apron on her body was armor, the last disguise protecting her pride. From a small radio, an old voice sang, "Oh, freedom," over me. Her mother used to sing like that before she passed, and that was the only thing that kept her standing each morning. In the sunlit living room, Laya placed a tray of glasses on the glass table. Outside the window, workers were erecting the wedding tent, the clinking of metal echoing alongside trumpet tuning. Charlotte was getting married. An upscale ceremony with 200 guests, Italian silk, imported Dutch flowers, a banquet table as long as a hotel corridor. Leia glanced at the taskboard pinned to the kitchen wall. Napkin check, flower color coordination, service uniform alignment. She didn't need to look closely. She had memorized every detail. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Margaret entered, silver hair pinned high, holding a teacup. "Laya," she said, her voice calm and cold. "The satin cloth should have been ironed an hour ago. Are you trying to ruin my daughter's wedding?" Leia bowed slightly, keeping her voice steady. "No, ma'am, I'm preparing it now." "Don't make me repeat myself," Margaret replied, turning away. Her heels clicked like a warning. Leia tightened her grip around the glass, but still smiled, as she always did. She straightened the tablecloths, each crease as precise as a stitch on a wedding gown. Not for perfection, but because it was the only thing she could control in this house. Naomi, the young maid, slipped past the back hallway and whispered, "They're on edge today, Miss Laya. Be careful." Leia gave a small nod and a short smile. Naomi had only been here a little over a year, her eyes always wide with fear, just like Leia's when she was 20. Jazz music floated down the hallway again. It sounded festive. But to Leia it was a funeral hymn, a farewell to the freedom she left behind each time she stepped inside this house. She placed her hand on the glass door, staring at her reflection. Not a maid, but someone who once had dreams, who once had hope, and somewhere deep down hadn't forgotten who she was. In the reception hall, Charlotte entered like a queen, her white silk robe trailing behind her. She glanced around, her eyes landing on the flower arrangement by the window. "Laya," she said, not bothering to turn around. "I said pure white flowers. These are cream. Change them." Leia stepped forward, inspecting the peonies. "These are white, just like the order form, Miss Charlotte." Charlotte turned, frowning. "I said change them. I'm the bride, not you." Her voice was sharp as a blade. In her eyes there was no conversation, only command. "Yes, I'll call the florist," Leia replied. She picked up the vase and walked away. Behind her, Charlotte called out, "And hurry! My mother's already annoyed with you." Leia's fingers clenched around the vase, knuckles white, but her steps remained steady, her back stayed straight, no complaints, no retreating gaze. Laya walked quickly through the back hallway, a light from the doorway slanting onto the worn tile floor. The scent of flowers and floor cleaner mingled in the air. Her hand still cradled the vase as if it might shatter at any moment. In the small utility room, she set it down and leaned against the wall. Cold, solid, but real. She closed her eyes. Once, twice. Her brother Darius's image rose in her mind, beaming in his engineer's suit. He still called weekly, telling her to quit. But Darius didn't understand. Leaving here meant losing the last income keeping her above water. From the kitchen came the clatter of dishes and Naomi's hushed voice. The girl was avoiding Margaret, just like everyone else. Leia took a deep breath, checked the clock, 18 hours until the wedding, and she had to survive every minute of it. Leia returned to the kitchen. The oven clicked. Heat brushed her face as she checked the cornbread tray. The warm scent of butter spread through the room, as if it could soothe everything. But it didn't. Margaret entered, phone in hand, eyes scanning the room. Laya, I just spoke to the caterers. They said the cornbread isn't done. Are you planning to starve our guests? It's baking now, on schedule, ma'am. Margaret curled her lip. I don't want on schedule. I want perfect. The words landed like a stone on her chest. Then she turned away, leaving behind strong perfume and thick air. Laya placed the tray on the counter, wiping the heat with a cloth. Her hands trembled slightly, not because of the bread, but because Margaret no longer saw her as human. She looked down at her hands that had raised an engineer, now being used like tools. Afternoon slipped by, sunlight stretching through silk curtains. In the banquet hall, Laya bent over to align crystal glasses on the long table. Each glass had to be in perfect line, mouth angled exactly. No deviation, not even half a degree. Behind her, Charlotte's voice cut in without warning. Laya? She looked up. Charlotte stood there in a white nightgown, holding a ribbon of silk. Mother says you are slow. I agree. You need to remember you're not the focus here. Laya nodded, her voice steady. I'll speed up. Not faster, Charlotte snapped, stepping closer. More precise, quieter, and know your place, so... Laya simply said, I understand. Charlotte turned away, walking slowly like on a runway. Laya watched her go, then bent again to polish the glasses. But this time her grip tightened. Each glass in her hand was a fragile line, between endurance and dignity, and that line was starting to crack. The service hallway was quiet as Laya walked in, arms full of freshly ironed tablecloths. She moved slowly, not from fatigue, but to keep herself from breaking. A door creaked open. Naomi peeked out, eyes wide. You okay? I heard Mrs. Margaret call you a burden. Laya smiled, not replying immediately. She set down the stack, smoothing the top cloth. I'm used to it, she said. As long as the job gets done. Naomi fell silent, then whispered, They don't have the right to say that about you. Laya turned to her. The fire in Naomi's young eyes was angry, naive but true. She placed a hand on the girl's shoulder. After this wedding, you should quit. If I were younger, I would too. Naomi nodded slightly, but both knew it wasn't that simple. Outside, the jazz resumed, cheerful, fake like the familiar mask this house always wore. In the reception hall, golden light spilled across the wooden floor like honey. Silk drapes swayed gently, fresh flowers stacked in tiers like a living painting. Everything looked perfect. But Laya couldn't see the beauty. She was cleaning the grand mirror at the far end of the room, the mirror that reflected the dreamy wedding setting. In it, she saw Charlotte laughing with her two bridesmaids. One of them spoke loud enough to be heard. A wedding like this, with staff like that. Strange. Charlotte laughed but didn't correct her. She glanced at Laya, her eyes sliding past as if no one stood there. Laya wiped slower, eyes fixed on the glass. She saw herself standing in that lavish scene, like a wrinkle on a white wedding dress, essential, but unwanted, forgotten. Back in the kitchen, Laya placed the final cloth on the shelf. No one looked, no one spoke, but she did everything with precision. It was the only way she could keep her heart intact. She sank into the wooden chair, weariness clinging to her like never before. From the old radio on the shelf, a familiar tune played, Oh, freedom, over me. She closed her eyes. Her mother's voice came back, warm, gentle. She used to sing that song while washing clothes in the backyard, hands covered in suds, eyes lifted toward the fading sky. Laya had heard those words the first time she was called less than, the first time someone refused to shake her hand because of her skin. Now the lyrics returned, drifting through the kitchen into the slight tremble of her palms. No one else could hear, only her. But it was enough to remind her she was still herself and had never forgotten. As evening fell, the mansion filled with the sound of heels, ringing phones, and sharp orders, like an orchestra with no conductor. Laya stood in the kitchen corner, reviewing the task list one last time. Each checked box was a small battle. Napkins folded, glasses polished, cornbread baked. Margaret walked in without looking at anyone, dropping a cold sentence. There's word from the wedding coordinator. They say catering isn't coordinating properly. Who's responsible? She looked straight at Laya. I warned you. Don't let things slip out of control. Laya nodded lightly. I'll double-check right away, ma'am. Margaret's voice sharpened. I don't need you to check. I need you not to mess up. Then she turned, leaving a thick silence behind. Nearby, Naomi, polishing silverware, whispered, They're coming for you. Laya didn't answer. She knew, And she also knew a small thing was about to become the excuse for something much bigger. The next morning, Savannah's sky was crystal clear as if awaiting something beautiful. But inside Laya, the storm had already begun. She walked into the main banquet hall holding a special silk cloth, the one meant for the marriage certificate table. Washed separately, ironed with care, the final touch to make everything perfect. The room was quiet. Charlotte stood before the mirror, her white wedding gown clinging to her body like a sheet of frost. Around her were bridesmaids, makeup artists, videographers. All avoided Laya's gaze as if she were invisible. Carefully she laid the cloth across the table. A sudden breeze blew in from an open window, knocking the cloth from her hands. It floated to the floor. Untouched, unwrinkled. But the sound echoed like a gunshot. The room froze. Laya bent to pick it up, gently brushing away imaginary dust, ready to place it again. Then Margaret entered. Her eyes scanned the room and locked on her and the cloth in her hands. Margaret approached, heels clicking against the wooden floor, her silk gown shimmering with each step. The air thickened. No one dared breathe. "What did you just do, Laya?" Her voice was low but edged with steel. "Ma'am, the cloth fell because of the breeze. I picked it up and was about to lay it again." "Just a cloth?" Margaret repeated, weighing each word. "This is my daughter's wedding day. Everything must be perfect. You just ruined that perfection." Charlotte turned from the mirror, arms crossed, eyes cold. "You're disturbing the energy," she said. "I don't want chaos around me today." Laya stayed calm. "I'll reset it now. There's no stain on the cloth, ma'am." Margaret stepped closer, eyes glinting with quiet triumph. "If you truly feel sorry, then show it properly." No one spoke. Then Margaret tilted her head. "Kneel, Laya, and apologize, like someone who knows their place." The room froze. The bridesmaids exchanged glances. One pressed her lips together. Another lowered her gaze. No one spoke. Laya stood tall, still holding the freshly dusted cloth. Her voice was low, steady. "I'm sorry if that caused trouble. I'll fix it immediately, but I don't need to kneel to do that." Charlotte stepped forward, her gown whispering across the floor like a white warning. "You think you're special," she said, voice small but sharp. "You're a servant. I'm the bride. My mother asked for a proper apology, not words, kneeling." Laya took a deep breath. Her gaze did not waver, not angry, not afraid, just clear. The line had been crossed. "I apologize. I'm fixing it. But I'm not a slave. I will not kneel over a cloth." Silence. Jazz music drifted in from the lawn, but now it sounded like it came from another world. One bridesmaid shifted. Charlotte flushed red. Margaret stepped back, but her lip curled. "You'll regret this arrogance, Laya." Margaret stood close enough that Laya could smell the jasmine-heavy perfume. She stared at her, voice dropping to a knife's edge. "Have you forgotten whose house this is? You work for me, I feed you." Laya didn't answer immediately. She gripped the cloth tighter, but her gaze held firm. "I work hard. I earn my pay. I don't sell my dignity." Charlotte stepped in, louder over her mother. "If you don't kneel right now, you'll lose everything. I'll make sure no one in the city hires you again." Laya looked at them both, her expression strangely calm. She slowly placed the cloth on the table, smoothing the final crease. "I've apologized, and I won't say it a third time." No one moved. Then from the doorway came a soft gasp. Naomi, standing there with a tray in hand, eyes wide, not just with shock, but admiration. Outside, a trumpet hit the wrong note, a jarring sound, like a warning. Something had broken, but it wasn't Laya. Time stood still. Margaret stared at Laya, stunned she dared defy her. Charlotte froze, a face flushed with shame and rage. "Who do you think you are?" Margaret hissed. "You are a servant. You have no right to speak like that." Laya said nothing. She simply stood tall, back straight, gaze unyielding. Charlotte clenched her jaw. "Get out! You're fired, right now." One bridesmaid coughed. Another looked at the floor. No one intervened. Laya nodded. "I understand." She turned and walked slowly out of the room, leaving the neatly placed cloth behind on the table. Behind her, Charlotte's shrill voice rang out. "Don't you ever come back here again!" But Laya didn't look back. For the first time in 15 years, she was walking in the right direction. Laya walked down the long hallway leading to the back of the estate. Her footsteps echoed off the wooden walls like farewells from the place that had held her captive for so long. Her heart pounded, but not from fear. She had just lost the only job that kept her afloat. But she had kept something far more precious, her self-respect. Just before the back door she met Darius, the young server who had overheard it all. His eyes were wide with awe and disbelief. "Miss Laius?" he whispered. "You just—" She smiled. It's okay, Darius. Where will you go?" Laya looked out at the lawn where the music had stopped, where white ribbons fluttered in the breeze. "I don't know," she said, "but I'll walk with my head held high." The back door closed behind Laya. She took a long breath. The outside air felt fresher than it ever had. In the distance, the wedding tent still shimmered white. Guests were arriving, unaware that a quiet earthquake had just shaken the house. Inside the kitchen, Darius entered, eyes alight. Naomi looked up from polishing silver, frowning. "What happened to Miss Laya?" "Mrs. Whitmore fired her," Darius said, "because she wouldn't kneel." A murmur passed through the kitchen. Old Auntie May, the head cook, set her ladle down, hands tightening on her apron. "They really did that?" she asked. "Made her kneel over a cloth?" Darius nodded. "She said, 'I'm a housekeeper, not a slave.'" Silence. Then Auntie May said, slowly and clearly, "That girl did what so many of us never dared." One person nodded, then another. A quiet flame inside everyone was beginning to stir. The mood in the kitchen had changed. The usual rush faded, replaced by a heavy quiet, as if everyone were hearing the same silent song. Auntie May slowly removed her apron and hung it on the hook. "That's enough," she said. "I'm not cooking another thing for this wedding." Naomi dropped her knife, eyes wide. "Aunt May—" That girl stood up. "What about us? Are we still bowing our heads to people who make others kneel over a napkin?" Darius nodded, voice firm. They tried to humiliate Laya in front of everyone. She didn't let them. A janitor looked up. "If we keep working, it's like saying they were right." Auntie May looked around. "We don't have much, but we still get to choose. Bow our heads or stand tall." One person quietly removed their gloves. Another turned off the stove. No one said the word strike. But everyone understood. Laya may have left the Whitmore house, but she remained, inside each of them. On the lawn, guests began gathering under sparkling wedding tents. Champagne glasses were filled, but no food trays appeared. Margaret swept out from the main hall, her dark gown trailing across the grass. Her eyes scanned the area, frustration plain. "Where's the food?" she demanded. "Why hasn't service started?" A server stood silently, then glanced at Darius near the buffet table. He gave a small shake of the head, a signal. Margaret marched toward the main tent, nearly tripping when she saw the empty banquet tables. Auntie May appeared from the back door, empty-handed, apron gone. She faced Margaret directly without flinching. "No one's cooking anymore, Mrs. Whitmore." "What?" We don't serve a wedding where dignity ranks below a cloth." Margaret stepped back. Guests were beginning to look, whisper. Her anger swelled, but all eyes were turning toward the ones who stood tall, not the one barking orders. Margaret clenched her jaw, pointing at Auntie May, voice sharp. "You're trying to ruin my daughter's wedding? Do you even know what you're doing?" Auntie May didn't blink. "I know exactly what I'm doing. The right thing. For the first time in years." From across the lawn, Naomi stepped out, no tray in hand. She stood beside Darius. "So do I," she said, voice shaky but clear. "I can't go on like nothing happened." A janitor stepped forward. "I won't cook. I won't look clean. I won't serve people who force others to kneel for a small mistake." Darius stepped closer, looking Margaret in the eye. "If you want the party to continue, you'll have to carry the trays yourself." The crowd began murmuring. Some guests exchanged looks. One guest held their wine glass but didn't drink. A woman whispered, "What's going on?" Margaret tried to keep her voice cool. "You're all destroying your own ass." Auntie May answered slowly. "And you just destroyed your family's name." Whispers spread across the wedding venue. Guests began to sense something was wrong. No food, no servers, no live music. Charlotte stepped out of the main hall, her wedding dress sparkling under the sun, eyes scanning for someone to blame. "What is going on?" she asked loudly. "Why isn't anyone serving?" Margaret moved closer, whispering in her daughter's ear. "The staff is staging a protest because of that girl." "What girl?" "Laya." Charlotte frowned. "But you already fired her." "The rest refused to work," Margaret said through gritted teeth. At that moment, Julian Carter, the groom, approached from the guest rows. He had heard enough. "Protest?" he repeated. "Why?" Margaret fell silent. Charlotte avoided his eyes. Julian looked at them both, his voice low and sharp as a blade. "What happened with Laya?" That question, small as it was, started to pull the mask off. Julian locked eyes with Margaret, then turned to Charlotte. I'll ask again. What did you do to Laya? Charlotte faltered. It was a small incident. She dropped a cloth and disrespected my mother. Mom just asked for an apology. By making her kneel? Julian interrupted, voice low, taut as wire. Charlotte stiffened. She refused and said unkind things. Julian took a step back, as if needing space to process what he'd heard. Over a dropped cloth. You demanded she kneel. Margaret interjected. It was about principle. She disrupted the mood. No, Julian snapped, voice cold. You did. You think you have the right to make a worker kneel over anything? No one answered. Julian looked around, noting the gathering crowd of guests. Then he raised his voice, clear and resolute. If this is how your family treats people, then I can't marry into it. The entire courtyard fell silent. Charlotte's eyes widened, and the false crown began to crack. The air at the wedding was now thick, like before a storm. Guests held their breath. The clink of a champagne glass echoed in the quiet. Charlotte stepped forward, trying to grab Julian's arm. Julian, you're overreacting. This is our wedding day. Everything's ready. They're just staff. Julian pulled away. No, they're human beings. And Laya worked for your family for 15 years. She was disrespectful, Charlotte said, eyes reddening. My mother just wanted a proper apology. Apology doesn't mean kneeling, Julian replied. That's humiliation. She apologized, but you wanted her broken. He turned to Margaret, his voice a blade. And you called that principle? Margaret said nothing. Julian looked back at Charlotte one last time, his tone calm. If you don't see anything wrong with that, then I can't marry you. He took off the ring and placed it in her hand. I'm sorry, but I won't marry someone who doesn't understand dignity. Then he turned and walked away, leaving behind the dress, the white tents, and the illusion of love. Julian walked down the aisle of white chairs, leaving behind a stunned bride and a mother whose face had gone pale. A guest let out a breath. Another took out their phone, recording. Whispers rippled like waves. What just happened? He really called it off? Over the maid? Charlotte's hands trembled. The wedding ring sat cold in her palm. She looked around, searching for sympathy, but saw only strange, uneasy stares. Margaret approached, grabbing her daughter's shoulders. We can't let this spread. Say it was a misunderstanding. Save face. Charlotte pulled away. He's already gone, Mom. From a distance, Naomi watched in silence. Darius stood beside her, whispering, The whole city will know before sunset. Auntie May stepped onto the grass and stood tall. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The wedding still had tents, flowers, and guests, but no meaning. Laya wasn't there, and yet she was the one who had stripped the white dress of its illusion. Laya stood alone on a street corner just a few blocks from the Whitmore estate. She didn't know exactly what was happening, but she felt something had shifted. Her phone buzzed. A message from Naomi appeared. He walked out. The whole place is in chaos. You did it, Miss Laya. Laya stared at the words, heart tightening, not with regret, but with the weight of what had just happened. She had lost her job, lost her income. But she was still standing. Back at the estate, Darius stepped up beside Auntie May. They looked at the empty tables, untouched champagne glasses, and the silenced band. She just refused to kneel, Darius said. And that was enough, Auntie May replied. A guest turned to a friend and whispered, I've never seen anything like that at a wedding. The other replied coolly, I've seen it too often, just no one ever said a word. The story was no longer just Laya's. It had become a flame, and flames don't turn back. Margaret stormed across the lawn, her heels sinking into the grass, dress catching underfoot. She shouted at the remaining staff, Yes, you get back to work! What do you think you're doing, ruining the wedding? No one responded. Darius stood tall, voice calm. We're not doing anything, ma'am. You did, Margaret glared. What did you say? Auntie May stepped forward, firm. You wanted perfect plates, perfect dishes, perfect flowers, but not basic respect. Naomi added, voice thick with emotion. Miss Laya apologized, but you wanted her to kneel. That's not an apology. That's degradation. A guest nearby overheard. She set her glass down and turned to her companion. They made a woman kneel on her wedding day? The wave of whispers spread, fast as oil on white linen. Elegance turned into a torn mask. Margaret spun in the chaos, but this time the storm wasn't hers to command. It belonged to those who had once been silent, and were silent no more. The lawn, once dressed like a dream, was now filled with skeptical stares. Guests huddled in small groups, whispering. A few pulled out their phones, recording the unfolding mess. Charlotte stood frozen amid the unraveling scene, her veil askew. A bridesmaid leaned in, whispering, "Rumors are spreading fast. Someone's live streaming." Margaret overheard and clenched her fists. "Shut it all down! No filming! No talking to the press!" No one obeyed. A guest approached a nearby table, staring at the untouched 5-tier cake. He muttered, "Ironic. So beautiful, no one dares touch it." Another guest replied, "Because it was built on humiliation." From afar, Naomi snapped a photo, not to post but to remember, so no one could ever say, "It didn't happen." Darius scanned the crowd, his eyes holding something new. No fear, no submission. A gust of wind picked up, lifting a white ribbon from one of the chairs. Some things once swept away can never be put back. In the marble foyer, David Harper walked, each step echoing through a day that was meant to be grand but had collapsed into disorder. His hand clenched his phone. Not over the wedding, but over the message from Marcus. They made Miss Laya kneel over a dropped napkin. He stopped in front of the grand mirror, but in the reflection he didn't see a groom. He saw a man caught between two worlds. Last night he'd seen Laya quietly carry flowers for Emily's third arrangement without a complaint. That morning he'd watched her wipe tables without a word of thanks. Laya, he'd thought, was the only one in this house who truly respected others. And now that woman was forced to kneel? He turned. No more doubt. David strode toward the stairs. He needed answers from the woman he was supposed to marry. The bridal suite door opened. Charlotte, dressed in snowy lace, turned around, a hurried smile on her lips. "David, you scared me. The guests are asking about—" "You and your mother," David cut in, voice cold as morning frost. "You made Miss Laya kneel over a piece of cloth?" Charlotte faltered. She glanced toward the mirror, avoiding his eyes. "She disrupted everything. My wedding. My mother just wanted her to know her place." "Her place?" David stepped closer. "She's the only reason this wedding even functioned. And you stood here demanding she lower herself for a harmless mistake." Charlotte grimaced, her voice cracking. "You're taking the maid's side." "No," David said, voice deepening. "I'm taking the side of a human being, someone better than all of us today." The room fell silent. The gowns sparkled in the light, but between them nothing was left to say. Charlotte stood frozen. David stepped back. There was no pride in his eyes, only disappointment. He turned, opened the door, and before leaving he spoke a single sentence, like a verdict. "If this is the family I'm supposed to join, marry, so I won't." Charlotte gripped the edge of her wedding dress, trembling. Tears welled, but she held them back. "David, I didn't mean to... My mom just wanted me to be respected today. She ruined everything." David stood, his gaze slicing through the lace like a blade. "Respect? Forcing someone who's already apologized to kneel? That's what you call respect?" Charlotte lowered her voice, nearly begging. "It was just a small gesture. A way to remind her who's in charge." David stepped forward, each word landing like a hammer. "You say she's just the help? But really, you're just a beautiful dress draped over your mother's arrogance." Charlotte choked on her breath. David looked at her one last time, not as a lover, but as a stranger. "I used to think you were different, but you only learned how to control, not how to care." She reached for him, trying to hold his hand. "I'm sorry, David. I was wrong. We can fix this. We can talk to her. We can—" "You don't get it," he cut in, eyes glassy, and he's glassy. "I don't need a wedding. I need a partner, and that partner doesn't bargain with other people's dignity." He turned away. The door swung open. Charlotte's dress whispered against the floor like a final sigh, but David didn't look back. Behind him was a wedding that had died. Ahead of him, a conscience still intact. Laya sat at her desk, fingers gliding over a stack of documents. The event was titled Savannah Women Rising, a gala honoring women of color in service in the arts. Sender, Mr. DeVries, a renowned regional event coordinator. The note at the end of the letter made her pause. "Not because you once worked at the Whitmore estate, but because you didn't let that house break you." Auntie May poured more tea. "Are you going to accept it?" Laya thought for a moment. "You know, for 15 years I dreamed of one thing, doing what I believed was right, without being afraid of losing everything. And now you've done it," Auntie May said. "Yes," Laya smiled softly. "Now I just have to decide. Do I keep building someone else's dream, or start something of my own?" She looked up. Her eyes no longer wavered. "I want to start an event company. Nothing flashy, but clean and respectful to every server, every cleaner." Auntie May beamed. Then I'll be your first chef on the team. Says a dream once buried in the kitchen that was now stepping into the light. 3 days later, Laya's small apartment was unusually crowded. Darius brought a whiteboard. Naomi arrived with stacks of sticky notes and the notebooks. Auntie May carried a tray of warm cornbread, filling the room with its comforting scent. Laya picked up a marker and wrote in bold letters, "Freedom Events." "You sure about that name?" Darius teased. Laya nodded. "Very sure, because freedom isn't something you're given. It's something you hold on to." Naomi asked softly, "If we get hired for a wedding, will someone try to make us bow again?" "No," Laya said, eyes bright, "because they won't be hiring servants. They'll be hiring people who know their worth." No drums, no chants. But everyone felt it. Something had begun. A journey, not for revenge, but to change how the invisible were seen. And its beginning wasn't in a conference room. It was a small kitchen with people who had learned how not to kneel. That afternoon, Laya received a message from an unknown number. Sender, Charlotte Whitmore. The first line was brief, "I'm sorry." Laya stared at the screen. The message continued. "I didn't realize how far I'd gone. I had no right to ask you to kneel. You were right." A long pause. Laya didn't respond immediately. She put the phone down and stepped to the window. The evening breeze rustled the trees. Bougainvillea petals drifted down onto the awning. Naomi glanced over from the work table, noticing her expression. "Something wrong?" Laya answered quietly, not turning around. "Charlotte apologized." Naomi frowned. "Do you believe her?" "I believed She's beginning to reflect, but forgiveness doesn't come in a message. It's a journey." She picked up her phone and typed slowly. "I hear you. But apologies need actions to hold meaning. When you're ready, I'll be here to listen further." She hit send. No bitterness, no surrender, just clarity, just Laya. Across the city, the Whitmore estate had fallen strangely silent. Wedding flowers wilted in vases. Tablecloths remained draped. The untouched wedding cake stood useless. Margaret sat in her office, phone idle. The partners, society friends, and party planners who once circled her were now silent. Charlotte entered, no longer in her wedding dress, but a thin sweater and jeans. Her eyes were sunken. Her hand clutched the unanswered phone. "Mom," Charlotte whispered. Margaret didn't respond. "Do you think we were wrong?" Margaret looked up. "We lost everything over a maid?" "No. We lost everything because we forgot we were human before we were important." Margaret tightened her lips. "We did what we had to protect our image." Charlotte shook her head. "You made a woman kneel over a cloth, and I stayed silent." A heavy silence settled, like dust on a gown that was never cleaned. Margaret looked away. Charlotte whispered, "I've apologized, but I'm not sure I deserve to be forgiven." The words finally weren't for her mother. They were for herself. That night, Laya's small apartment was again full of light. The round wooden table was packed. Naomi, Darius, Auntie May, and new faces. Former staff from other homes, a florist delivery man, a retired janitor. Each brought a story about being called by numbers, not names. About being told to stay quiet when insulted. About grand events where they were only shadows. "And then you stood up," said a middle-aged woman looking at Laya. "You didn't yell, you just refused to kneel, and that was enough to show us we could too." Laya bowed her head. Words caught in her throat. "Freedom Events isn't just a business," Darius said. "It's a statement. If someone hires us, they hire with respect." Naomi raised her hand. "I asked Reverend Coleman if we can use the church hall. Miss Laya, we could have our launch event there." Laya nodded. "We don't need to start big. We just need to start right." Outside, the night grew darker. But in that room, the light came from something money couldn't buy: faith. On Sunday, the church hall where Reverend Coleman preached each week was simply decorated. Fresh flowers in glass jars, tablecloths made from recycled linen, sunlight filtering through stained glass windows. No grand stage, no VIP list. But everyone present knew this was no ordinary launch. Freedom Events was officially born. Reverend Coleman stepped up to the microphone. "We're not just here to celebrate a business," he said. "We're here to welcome a philosophy, a reminder that work doesn't define your worth, but dignity does." In the front row, Laya sat between Naomi and Auntie May, eyes glistening. Darius stepped up to share. "I used to think people like me should just work quietly. But Laya showed me, your voice doesn't have to be loud to be heard, just timely." Applause rang out, not thunderous, but strong enough to shake the walls gently. Freedom Events wasn't a reward for obedience. It was the result of a back that refused to bow. After the launch, guests lingered around the humble tables. No one talked about funding, contracts, or tone. They talked about respect, about new beginnings, about stories once left untold. A young woman approached Laya, holding a flyer. "You're Laya Johnson, right?" Laya nodded, a little surprised. "My mother used to work with you at the Whitmore house. She told me, if that woman can still stand tall, then we have no reason to bow." She handed Laya the flyer. It was an invitation to a local labor rights panel. "They want you to speak." Auntie May leaned in, grinning. "See? They're asking you to stand on a stage now, not kneel." Darius laughed. Naomi poured more lemonade, as if the air had become easier to breathe. Laya looked around. No white walls, no commands barked from above, just real people, real laughter, and a community that no longer needed permission to rise together. Late at night, after the event had ended, the church hall was quiet and warm. Laya stayed behind with Darius and Auntie May to fold chairs and clear tables. No one gave orders, no one stood above the rest. They worked, because they were a team. Auntie May chuckled. "Remember when we first met in the Whitmore kitchen? I thought you were all stiff and serious." Laya smiled. "And I thought you'd quit in 3 days." Darius pushed chairs into rows. "You don't know, the day you got fired, our hearts were burning. We said nothing, but inside we knew. If one person stood up, we weren't crazy." Laya looked around the room. No silk linens, no waitstaff, but they had all eaten together like family. No one had to stand behind anyone else. Just one table, no need for servers, because here everyone had a seat. And worth wasn't measured by an apron, but by how they treated each other. That day, Laya didn't need to shine. She just needed to be present and still standing. Night fell. Laya's small apartment was quiet, lit only by a soft lamp by the window. She sat alone, phone in hand. Charlotte Whitmore's message still sat on the screen. One more line had been added. "I'm not asking for forgiveness because I deserve it. I'm asking because I want to learn how to be better." Laya typed a few words, deleted them, not out of anger, but because forgiveness, if it comes, must be born of change, not apology alone. She opened a new document on her laptop. The title read Code of Honor, Freedom Events. Rule 1, never kneel, never bend, never stay silent in the face of injustice. As she typed, Laya wasn't thinking about the Whitmores. She thought of Naomi, of Darius, of those yet to join this journey. She thought forgiveness is a path, but justice is the compass. And sometimes, silence is also a way of saying, I'm not ready and I have that right. Tuesday morning, while reviewing materials for Freedom Event's first gig, Laya received an email. Sender Julian Carter. Subject, thank you for helping me see. The body was just a few lines. I left Savannah and returned to New York. On the day I called off the wedding, I didn't just walk away from a ceremony. I walked away from a family built on silence and fear. Laya, you showed me what courage looks like. If you ever organize an event in New York, let me be your first client. Laya sat still for a few moments, not because of the offer, but because of the respect behind it. No guilt, no excuses, just a simple recognition, the right way to the right person. Naomi entered holding a backdrop design. I think we should print the words "Freedom starts with standing" in the center. What do you think? Laya looked up and smiled. Perfect. Just like that email. It wasn't a gift, it was the result of a choice. To stand tall when the world expected you to bow. That weekend, Laya returned to the old street, the one leading to the Whitmore estate. But this time, she didn't pass through the iron gates. She stood across the street, facing the house that had held her in quiet submission for years, not to confront, but to say goodbye. Auntie May joined her, 2 cups of hot tea in hand. Didn't think you'd ever come back here. Laya smiled softly, taking a cup. You know, I used to think this was the only place that could give me a stable life. And now? Now I see. It was just a polished shell, covering something rotten. The wind rustled through the old oaks. A curtain on the upper floor fluttered. Naomi pedaled up, calling out, Laya, the church confirmed the date! Our first official event is happening! Laya nodded. We're starting small, but we're starting right. She turned, walking toward the afternoon sun. The estate still loomed behind her, large, cold, but the dream had moved on. It was growing now, from a kitchen, from a few who believed in kindness, from a woman who had never knelt. That evening, Laya sat on her worn sofa, sipping tea and scrolling through new messages. Dozens of emails, hundreds of notes from strangers. A nurse from Mississippi wrote, "One day my boss humiliated me in front of patients. I said nothing, but then I saw you, and now I know next time I won't stay silent." A single father from Chicago wrote, "I taught my son to always be polite, but because of you, I also taught him that politeness doesn't mean tolerating injustice." Laya read each line, eyes misting. Not from pride, but because she knew every message was an old scar, now healing with hope. Naomi leaned against her shoulder and whispered, "You didn't just quit to reclaim your own dignity. You helped others reclaim theirs, too." Laya set down the phone and squeezed Naomi's hand, in a world that once weighed heavy on her back. She finally felt light, because she wasn't walking alone anymore. The next day, the church was packed. Not for a sermon, but for a fundraiser. The first official event for Freedom Events. Voices rose from the choir. "Oh, freedom! Over me!" Laya sat in the front row, holding a simple program printed on recycled paper. She didn't speak. She wasn't on stage. She simply listened. Reverend Coleman stepped up, his voice deep and warm. "We're not here to speak of Laya Johnson as a symbol, but to remember that each of us carries a Laya inside. The part that knows when it's time to stand, even if it comes at a cost." The applause wasn't thunderous like in banquet halls, but it struck deep. Naomi and Daria stood behind the volunteer sign-up table. Young, old, black, Latinx, Asian, everyone wanted to contribute. A small child tiptoed up to Laya and handed her a drawing made with colored pencils. It showed a brown-skinned woman standing tall, holding a bouquet, with a crowd behind her. Laya asked softly, "Who did you draw?" The child smiled. "You're the one who started it, but we're the ones who keep going." Laya clutched the page gently, warmth spreading through her chest like spring sunshine. A legacy doesn't need bronze statues or textbooks. It lives when others keep standing tall. In a small room, late afternoon sunlight spilled gently through the window. Laya sat at her desk, her phone buzzing quietly. The screen lit up with a new message, from a name that made her heart pause. Charlotte Thompson. She opened it. "Laya, I'm sorry. I didn't want it to go this far. I truly regret it. Can we talk?" Laya set the phone down. Her hand trembled slightly. There were nights she had imagined hearing those two words. "I'm sorry." She thought she'd smile, feel peace, like closing the last chapter of an old book, but now, faced with it, her heart tangled like thread, not from hatred, but because pain runs deeper than words can erase. She rose and walked to the window. Outside, children rode bikes, Ms. Ruth chatted with neighbors, Clara laughed with Marcus. She was no longer alone, but she wasn't someone who let go easily either. She returned to the desk and looked at the message again. She didn't delete it. She didn't reply. Forgiveness would come, but not today. The backyard of the little church on South Street was busier than ever. Wooden tables had been quickly arranged, tablecloths still slightly wrinkled. The Freedom Events name tag printed off-center. Its F faded from a printer glitch. The lemonade lacked ice. The pastries arrived 10 minutes late. But no one complained. Guests chatted joyfully. Children played beneath the oaks. Acoustic guitar music drifted from a wooden balcony. Ms. Ruth carried a tray of hot cornbread from the kitchen. Marcus checked the string lights. Clara guided newcomers to their seats. Laya stood by the welcome desk, clipboard in hand, hands trembling, not with nerves, but with emotion. She had once served at luxurious events, where every pepper grain had to be perfect, but here no one checked if napkins were folded evenly. They looked into each other's eyes and smiled, because here respect wasn't in champagne glasses. It was in the way each person was called by their name. An elderly pastor approached, patting her shoulder. "God saw you stand without fear, Laya, and he sent this whole city to walk with you." She nodded, eyes burning but dry. This beginning wasn't flawless, but it was hers, honest, oleic, and upright. When the event ended, the last to leave wasn't a guest, it was Laya. She remained alone in the clearing, now cleaned up, where so many had passed through, leaving behind smiles, gratitude, and trust. No stage lights, no music, only the sound of summer cicadas and the breeze brushing her shoulders. She looked at the sign hung at the gate. Freedom Events, where everyone stands tall. She placed a hand over her heart. Inside, her mother still sang, "Oh, freedom over me." She knew hard days still lay ahead, but this time she wouldn't walk alone. Beside her were Naomi, Darius, Clara, Auntie May, and hundreds more who had never bowed, not in spirit. One wedding collapsed, but a community stood up. One refusal to kneel sparked thousands of footsteps, and if anyone asked what changed a whole city, Laya would answer in a quiet, steady voice. One person stood up, and the world learned. Bowing was no longer something we ever had to do again.